going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And despite round 20 already being underway, today's focus is on round 19 with another edition of the round recap. A little bit behind the 8 ball and a little bit later than I would have liked to have gotten this out, but hey, we're sitting here, we're doing it. And round 19 was one of those rounds that is starting to really push whether or not teams are going to be contending for finals or whether they're just making up numbers, whether some teams we've bought into are flying under the flagship of pretenders. We've seen some great matchups over the course of the last few weeks, but some of those are really starting to split just how few and far between some of these teams are comparatively to the rest. And obviously being at the pointier end of the season, these are games that count severely, especially if your team is still well within finals contention, which takes us to the very first game of said round. GMHBA Stadium, Geelong hosting St Kilda. And this was a game that I thought St Kilda would be up to their eyeballs within. 2 weeks ago against Port Adelaide, they absolutely dismantled them defensively, and their launch from defensive 50 to forward 50 was absolutely incredible. And coming into this particular game, with the outs that they had, especially to the likes of Tanner Bruhn, to Jeremy Cameron, these big type role players, I thought St Kilda would be primed for another defensive dismantling, but I was rudely mistaken. Geelong absolutely ripped them to shreds. Now, probably my fault as well for not identifying the fact that St Kilda have not beaten Geelong at GMHBA since 1999, or something absolutely sensational to that degree. That is a huge factor that just went over the top of my head. So that's my bad completely for thinking that St Kilda could probably overcome that big of a gap between their last win to this point in time at this ground. But again, I just felt coming into this game, St Kilda had more momentum. We've seen Geelong drop very winnable games over the last few rounds, and St Kilda, when they turn up the pressure factor, their transition from back half to forward half is absolutely great. And while they're missing some key components like Jack Sinclair, probably more so Jack Sinclair, shifting Brad Hill to defence, shifting Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira off of half-back more so than playing out the midfield, freeing up Wilkie a little bit. These are moves that I thought were going to hold St Kilda in good stead, but they were absolutely picked apart. And this was a game that I feel was won by the coaches board and the magnet movements of Geelong. They had answers all around the ground, and we will get to that momentarily as I begin to stumble and bumble. Looking at the match timeline, St Kilda, after quarter time, were out of this game completely. I felt still, even though the gap at quarter time was 14 points, I thought St Kilda could still get back into the game, but it just started to taper off from there. At quarter time, Geelong led 4-2, 26 to 2 straight 12. Half time, 7-8-50. led 3-5, 23. Three-quarter time, 11-11, 77, led 7-6, 48. And the final score, 15-12, 102, defeated 11-9, 75. This was, as I said, a game where the tag of O'Shane Mullen needs to be studied. This kid and his ability to be able to shut down some of the game's big-time movers doesn't get spoken about enough, I feel. And keeping Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira as closely tight-knitted as he did, taking his sting out of the game a little bit, I thought was absolutely sensational and helped set this game up. Cal Wilkie, heading into this game, had only been outbodied in a handful of one-on-one situations. Polkinghorne comes into this game as a debutant for Geelong and outbodies and outmuscles Wilkie out of the contest not once but twice. It was a debut that will be held in high regard down at the Cattery, but to be able to physically move Wilkie around when he's been such a stone wall for St Kilda, is huge. Statistically, this is a game that I feel the scoreline, 27 points, flattered St Kilda a little bit, because when you look at it, they matched Geelong in contested possession around the ground and in clearances. However, they were unable to generate any effective score chains from their core midfield. And we've been seeing, you know, Max Hall, Hugo Garcia, these names stand tall and help generate score, but it's something that was taken away from them. They only managed 18 points from this particular avenue, 2 goals 6, compared to Geelong going on a rip of 7 goals 10, 52. And this was a game where intercept possession also opened up some scoring avenue as well. From intercepts, Geelong scored 10 goals 8, 68, doubling St Kilda's output of 5 goals 4, 34. So their midfield, Geelong's midfield, and their intercept game just tying together to bring about this explosive dynamic was very inspiring to watch as a neutral supporter, but now puts them back in firm conversations for pushing for a premiership. I've said it many times, and it's rhetoric that goes around the competition more often than not. Geelong always find themselves in prime finals position wherever they finish on the ladder. And if they can finish in the top 4, I feel that they're guaranteed to walk to a prelim. Just my personal opinion. This game, however, did see a couple of injuries, and having seen at the point of this recording the team announcements for the Geelong Melbourne game on Friday night, which would have already gone down by the time this video does drop, Sean Manor was taken off for a hamstring injury in this game, but has been named to play in the Melbourne game. And I feel this is probably just more hamstring awareness, given the gap on the scoreboard. Take him off, rest him, put him on ice. He's a very critical player to that forward half for Geelong. With Jeremy Cameron already missing, you need to protect what you can. However, Max Holmes, running in all-Australian form, has done a ankle injury which was not just identified as syndesmosis, but had also partial fractures in it as well. Surgery has been undergone, and he is all but done for the season, which, again, it's never good to see any player go down with injury, but I feel key players, the big name players for clubs, have been hit incredibly hard this year. At the start of the year, we saw the likes of Christian Petrarca go down with hamstring injury. In the back half of this year, we've lost not only Zach Butters to syndesmosis, and could we have seen him play his last Port Adelaide game ever as a player? Who knows? But now Max Holmes sits out, and this could be a big enough injury that rules him out of finals contention. This could be a Geelong team that goes to another grand final and Max Holmes misses again due to injury. Obviously, in the past, it was due to hamstring, but this is completely different. It just sucks to see players go down, especially players that have been so pivotal in setting up their team's success for the season. Moving on to the team statistics, though, we have already identified the fact that this game was a lot closer to statistically than what the scoreboard alludes to. St Kilda had 2 more disposals for the game, 410 to 408. The kicking game is where Geelong took the advantage, 224 to 199. The handball game of St Kilda is what they tried to get going, but it was just shut down, 184 to 211. Inside 50s, Geelong had 61 to 48, of which they ran at 44% efficiency inside 50 against St Kilda running at 47. The hitouts was won by Geelong, which is incredible to think of considering the game that Rowan Marshall played in this outing, 43 to 33. But they only won the clearances by 2, 43 to 41. Their biggest gap being the centre clearance of 14 to 9. St Kilda getting the better of the stoppage clearance, 32 to 29. Uncontested possession, very close. They drew even for contested possessions, 136, and Geelong only had 7 more uncontested possessions for the game. But St Kilda turned the ball over 74 times, which was well up on their seasonal average. They actually had 10 more turnovers in this game than they averaged for the season. So they were very, very unclean with ball in hand. Where this game was truly set up, given the gap of, disposal being ever so slightly, they only had two more possessions for the game collectively, or two less possessions rather, but they had almost 40 more marks, 110 to 72. This is where Geelong's game style of loving to slow down the play defensively and taking the sting out of things truly set them up. And this was well up on their seasonal average for marks as well. They go 92 marks on average. They took 110. St Kilda have been averaging 100 marks a game. They only managed 72. So it was a defensive press in that particular setup of which how Geelong wanted to move the ball that was able to get more quality out of the quantity of disposals they had. St Kilda laid 81 tackles in this game, 15 of which were inside 50. Big improvement, 29 more than Geelong. Geelong only laid 52, which was just down on their average for the year. But St Kilda blew out their average by almost 30 more than what they usually lay. So the pressure was there from St Kilda. It's just, obviously, you can't tackle a player that is marking the ball and they're chipping it around and they're maintaining possession through that avenue. But this also brings up a discussion point that I feel needs to be had, because more often than not in this game, and I feel it's something that tapers on through every other game in the competition and every other round, and we've seen it for numerous years. When it comes to a genuine forward versus defender battle, both players are often seen in situations where they're holding each other, whether it's a tug of the jumper, whether it's arms wrapped around. 9 times out of 10, the forward is the one that is going to be paid the free kick. And I feel in this game, Cal Wilkie was done so dirty. There was many situations where he was being held. You could see the jumper clearly being pulled, and free kick paid to Polkinghorne or whoever Wilkie was on at the time. And just having a look in isolation at the game that went down on Thursday night just gone with Adelaide versus Collingwood, there were instances where Tex Walker had a fistful of Maynard and was like up in the chest, like the chin area here, pushing away, but yet Tex gets the free kick because he's the forward, because he's being held by the defender. I think this is something that needs to be cleaned up a little bit, because obviously the forward craft is taught to be able to manipulate those kind of situations in order to get the adjudication. But it just, again, taking the sting out is something that I'm going to probably say a lot today, but it takes the sting out of a genuine one-on-one battle when both players are holding each other, but then the umpire flies on through and pays a free kick to the team that is in position to score, the forwards. It's just, I don't know. It's just, to me, it doesn't sit. It doesn't sit well with me. And there was many a time where just reading Wilkie's face, you could see how fucking bad he thought he was getting dealt here. As I said, though, we will highlight Oisin Mullen one more time, because I should have probably given him a vote, really. I haven't given him a vote in this game, but boy, for the work he did, I feel he definitely deserves it. I don't think I'm going to, because the 3 I landed on, I think, were the 3 best on the night. But when he can come out against Naz, keeps Naz to only 21 touches, 2 clearances, only takes 2 marks. I'm not sure on the disposal efficiency he ran at. Let me quickly just get those stats up. He ran at, I don't think it was overly impressive, because I'm scrolling down and I still haven't found his name. 52% he kept him to. Whereas for the night himself, Oisin Mullen ran at 75%. And how many disposals did he have comparatively to shutting down arguably St Kilda's best? He had, I think he did have less. He only had 12 touches, right? But he ran at 75 from those touches. He had 3 clearances himself, 5 tackles, and he kept Naz to 21. Naz is a player that's been having like 30, 35, pushing 40 disposals running off of halfback. So definitely feel it's a player and a situation and a moment that needs to be highlighted. I feel the tag is coming back. It's not as predominant as it used to be in the past, but boy, if you can do it right, the ability to negate an opponent's better player truly takes just something out of the game for them. Taking Naz out of the equation forces the hand of Ross Lyon to have to make other moves, and it throws things out of whack. We've seen that already over the course of round 20, which we'll go and we'll discuss that within that round 20 recap when the time comes. But Oisin Mullen has had some huge scalps, and this particular scalp here truly helped Geelong set up because it just took Naz out of the equation completely. You don't have to worry about him then because Oisin Mullen is doing his job. If he managed to get off the chain with that tag, it would have been a completely different outcome. But unfortunately for St Kilda, it was not the fact. Looking at the three that I voted for, I gave one vote to Bailey Smith. Some might think a little bit low, but given the other two, I think it's justifiable. 35 disposals, 5 contested, 6 marks, 1 tackle, 2 clearances, 868, not 886 metres gained, 1 goal, 6 score involvements. I did give 2 votes to Brian Myers. Now, it is my understanding and personal belief that Brian Myers is possibly one of, if not the best kicks inside 50 for Geelong. He doesn't score too often himself, but the score involvements and the direct goal assists this guy racks up each and every week when he's playing is so critical to Geelong winning games, because whenever he touches the ball, he is very, and we talk about Murphy Reid a lot, he's very Murphy Reid-esque. He's a great kick inside 50. More often than not, he's going to hit someone lace out and they're going to generate score from those entries. He said post-game in this particular outing that he hasn't been playing due to form and needing to find confidence again, which I don't even know if that was even a thing, because he's a player that I feel if he's having a down couple of weeks, you don't drop him. You let him find his form back at the level. He came back in and he's put in a great performance, and maybe that VFL treatment served that. But I just feel this bloke should always be in this Geelong lineup. And what's even more wild is after, this outing here, it is still being touted around town that Brian Myers has been told by Geelong to consider his options at the end of the season. When you're told to consider your options, more often than not, you're on the way out and you're going to be traded elsewhere. And I think any club in the competition would be stoked to pick up Brian Myers with the ball use, especially with the outing he had. 22 disposals, 7 contested, 7 marks, 2 tackles, 322 metres gained, 3 goals, 4 goal assists, 12 score involvements. I thought he was Geelong's best on the night, and he didn't have to have a ridiculous amount of disposals to do so. Best on ground, however, to me, in a losing team was Rowan Marshall. I kept saying throughout the game, because my dad is an avid St Kilda supporter. We already know Geelong were trying to get Rowan Marshall via a trade at the end of last year, and they're still very much on the at the table wanting to get that deal done at the end of this year. I kept saying this was a great audition for Rowan Marshall for Geelong at Geelong. He was huge. He had a St Kilda club defining moment in this game. He put St Kilda on his back and he said, boys, if fucking Naz isn't going to rise to the occasion, just jump on my back and I'll drag you along for the journey. 33 disposals, 26 of those were contested, which is a St Kilda club record for most contested possessions by any St Kilda player in history. 4 marks, 2 tackles, 30 hitouts, 12 clearances, 368 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements. Wild to think he puts on a performance like this with no Tom De Koning in the team, and when Tom comes back in, which he has been named to play for St Kilda in round 20, you watch the difference in output when he has competition versus when he's on his own. Some players, some clubs perform better with a one ruck selection, and St Kilda are absolutely stupid, I feel, for having Tom De Koning come in and pushing that ruck situation. I mean, they've had no Max King. Why not bring Tom De Koning into the conversation and have him play out of the forward line? Take the forward hitouts, let Rowan Marshall do the rest. I don't know. something to consider. What did we learn out of these games? St Kilda, with all the money they're splashing around, I don't think they are yet seriously to be considered contenders, which is wild considering they can still finish in the wild card round, but I think if they do, they get bounced out week 1. Geelong, finding ways to get it done. They win this game with Holmes on ice, with Manor on ice, no Jeremy Cameron, no Tanner Brun. It's going to be interesting to see how deep Geelong can run without these players and whether or not they can come back in at all. But if we ever question Geelong's legitimacy, I think we are absolutely stupid. Friday night was at the SCG with Sydney hosting Adelaide. 2 teams vying for a top 4 spot. Sydney have been playing definitive football throughout 2026. Up there with Fremantle with their run and carry game as being the stock standard of the competition when it comes to that style of gameplay. Adelaide coming into this game, the number 1 pressure rated team in the competition, and there are other stat lines that have them sitting either number 1 or number 2 behind just one singular team. So statistically, Adelaide are performing as one of the elite teams in the competition for the season, and I feel their run this year, given those statistics, has been a bit underrated. I feel people haven't been paying much mind to them. This was a game that I honestly thought I tipped Adelaide to win. Unfortunately, it turns out I tipped Sydney and I fumbled because it was Adelaide by 16 points in a very close contest, which early on looked like Sydney was going to absolutely dominate, but this was definition of a genuine arm wrestle. Quarter time, 3-2-20 from Sydney was trailing 6-5-41, but then at halftime, 8-5-53 led 7-3-45. The comeback and fight from Sydney was huge. 3-quarter time, Sydney took the lead, 9-8-62 to 8-8-56, but the final score saw Adelaide 13-9-87 defeat Sydney 10-11-71. Statistically breaking this game down, there are some disparaging stat lines, which obviously shows the dominance that I've just hinted at with Adelaide and their pressure rating around the contest. Cunningham for Sydney ended this game with a concussion, and this brings about a discussion point I feel that needs to be had. This instance saw Darcy Fogarty come in and attempt to lay a tackle, but the way he did it, he swung his arm in a motion that clotheslined Cunningham. He's been suspended for 3 weeks. 3 weeks seems to be the number that the MRO wants to throw out, because this is the same amount of weeks that they tried to give to Jack Crisp, and it failed. The same amount of weeks they gave to Paul Curtis, which was upheld. It's just, I don't understand how these actions and outcomes can warrant the exact same, adjudication, the same allowance of weeks that they want to sit these players out for when they're completely different things, completely different outcomes. I just feel this year especially, it's been something over the last few years, don't get me wrong, it's a genuine roll of the dice and a game of roulette when it comes to sanctioning players and letting them, either get off or they're sanctioned, or the amount of weeks they get. It's almost like Michael Christian walks up to the roulette wheel, drops the ball in, spins it, and goes, all right, how many weeks are we giving this guy? Or does he land on green? Does he get off? I said the exact same sentiment in last week's round recap, and we're getting it again. Fogarty did deserve weeks for this hit, but then later on in this particular round, Liam Baker elects to leave the ground, hip and shoulders a bloke, catches him in the chin with his elbow, flush, 1 week. For an intentional act, where you could think that Fogarty, with the way he came in to tackle, it could be perceived as accidental. It's not a deliberate kind of swinging of the arm. He wanted to punch him in the head kind of deal. I don't know. We're going to move on because I'll get stuck dragging the AFL for way too long. As I said, 16 points the way of Adelaide. Statistically, they had plenty more disposal, 409 to 353. The kicking game was their dominant output here, 258 to 201, and they matched Sydney in the handball game, which is incredible in itself, because Sydney love to run the handball game more often than not. And the fact that Adelaide were able to squash that, keep up with them in that kind of facet, and then still have 57 more kicks around the contest, just helped them get the momentum on their terms. They had 56 more disposals. They had 3 less inside 50s, 59 to 56, the way of Sydney. But it was the efficiency inside 50 that let both teams down. Both teams ran at very subpar levels, especially Sydney, set by their standard. Sydney ran at 42%, which is down on their 51% average, and Adelaide ran at 39%, which is down from their 48% average. This was a game where the hit-out game was dominated by Brodie Grundy, but the clearance game was absolutely dominated by Adelaide. 53 hit-outs to 34, but 51 hit-outs to 38. I said hit-outs. I meant clearances. 51 clearances to 38. When you think of the fact that Brodie Grundy always gets a handful of clearances himself, then you've got Heaney, you've got Warner, you've got Rowbottom, you've got Errol Goulden, all these players running through there, and then Adelaide rock up. Their pressure game around the contest allows players like Berry, like Rankin, like Rochelle, like Dawson to get hands first on the ball and dominate clearance. They split it evenly at the centre clearance, 13 apiece, but stoppage clearance, 25 to 38, the way of Adelaide. And they showed in isolation the way Adelaide was expanding around that contest. They would make big gaps, all the players pushing out. So when it came to that contest, the players like Rochelle, Rankin, running through, getting clear clearance work, unbodied, was sensational by Adelaide. 166 contested possessions to 149. The uncontested possession game from Adelaide absolutely chopped Sydney up. 226 to 178. Sydney have been averaging 233 uncontested possessions this year. That's a difference of almost 60 possessions in this particular game. And the marking game from Adelaide, again, they had plenty more kicks. You could tell they're going to have plenty more marks. 85 to 53 around the ground. And they just dominated again. The pressure. Listen to this pressure factor, right? Now, let's talk about the tackling pressure of this team. 72 tackles to 60. So they lay 12 more tackles for the game. Both clubs running at either at their average or just above their seasonal average. Sydney laid 5 tackles inside 50. Adelaide laid 21. They almost doubled their seasonal output inside 50 with their tackle pressure. And it's players again like Rankin, like Rochelle, these types of players getting in and under the contest. Sam Berry, you know, it's just something to behold. I feel some people might feel at home that I'm overglazing Adelaide a little bit, given certain circumstances that just went down against Collingwood on Thursday night, but hard to dispute that the pressure game of Adelaide has been the best in the competition. They're ranked number 1 for pressure for a reason, and that is just exemplified statistically by how this game was broken down. When it came to individual performance, there were some players that I felt stood out more than others, and again, this is all objective to my own, thought process and decisions. I have decided moving forward that instead of doing a 3-2-1 vote system when it comes to these round recap videos, next year I'm going to step into a more coaches vote situation where we do a 5-4-3-2-1. Just opens up the door, I feel, for more players to be highlighted, because you've got efforts from Callum Mills, Jake Saligo, Peatling, Fogarty, Warner, these types of players all going unchecked without votes from myself in this particular game. And some people might think that's harsh. I mean, I'm just a fool in front of the camera who loves AFL and just wants to find avenues to talk about the footy. But when it comes to determining who was best on, it's always going to be a divisive conversation. So let me know in the comment section down below if you ever agree, if you disagree. But the 3 I landed on, I think you can't really argue against. I did give 1 vote to Jordan Dawson, which is a little bit left wing, but I thought his tackle pressure and his clearance work, especially up against the likes of Heaney, Goulden, Warner, was incredible and a big part into setting up that forward press that Adelaide had. 23 disposals, 9 were contested, 5 marks, 7 tackles, 6 clearances, 404 metres gained, 2 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Tom Papley. As much as he's a fucking little bastard and he gets in the heads of many, he is a player that plays that Brian Myers type role for Sydney. He gets ball in hand, and if he's not scoring himself, he is setting up avenue for his teammates, and it's exactly what he did in this game. 24 disposals, 7 were contested, 4 marks, 1 tackle, 2 clearances, 525 metres gained, 4 goals, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements. But I feel the defensive efforts of Wayne Miller truly set up the rebound work that set up Adelaide when they needed it the most. And if this guy does not get an All-Australian blazer this year, he has been absolutely robbed. 26 disposals, 6 were contested, 12 marks, 4 tackles, 1 clearance, 585 metres gained, 5 score involvements, highest rated player on the field. What did we learn from this game? Adelaide's pressure factor can win them a premiership. It is their continuity that lets them down. Sydney, on the other hand, have all the pieces they need for a premiership. They have brought in Charlie Curnow, leading the Coleman. He's kicked another handful of goals. But I feel what lets them down again is this game style they are running. They don't have a plan B. And when it fails, when they can't get the forward handball going, they fall into a lull that they can't get out of. And I feel Dean Cox, as well as he has been at the helm for Sydney, needs to develop a secondary plan, because if Sydney don't have one, that becomes their ultimate Achilles heel. If you can shut down their handball game, they don't have anything else. They can't get their run and carry going, and it takes them out of the game completely. First on Saturday saw a huge upset looming, because up until half-time, Port Adelaide led Fremantle in a game that had no Zach Butters, no Jason Horne-Francis, no Mitch Georgiades. Lockie Jones had been bashed and beaten the week prior. Joe Richards ends this game injured, and yet Port Adelaide came out in the first half and showed up a lot of people. And it's a game that has you question where this effort has been lying without your key movers, without your better players. You could argue that Butters, Horne-Francis and Georgiades are probably their best 3. Where has the effort been with those players in the team, let alone without it? But Fremantle, just like we saw the week prior, where they have a first half where they kick no goals and then they pile on 100 points in the second, stormed home to win by 28 points in a game where I feel Port Adelaide fans should really walk away with it with their head held high, because they just showed that without Zach Butters, they can still be competitive. Maybe they tape it off in that final half, but you still have Horne-Francis who will be around. You don't know whether Butters might even still re-sign. We don't know. Personally, I feel he's gone. A lot of people aren't giving Richmond any chance of landing him. I would love to land him. Does he land at the Bulldogs? Does he go to Geelong? I don't think he'll be at Port Adelaide. But when you have the key movers back, when you've got your main forward in Georgiades back in, when you get Jason Horne-Francis back in, can they be as competitive as this and get themselves out of this bottom 4, bottom 5 kind of situation? Especially when they get Connor Rozee back in. A lot of people still fail to recognise the fact that Rozee's movements off of half-back last year was absolutely incredible for Port Adelaide, and that's something they've been truly missing. Does he come back in and play that role? Does he get more midfield minutes if Zach Butters does leave? I don't know. But I was very impressed with the first half efforts of Port Adelaide. And even in the third term, there were moments. In that last quarter, it was just all Fremantle, and there was unfortunately no stemming the flow or stopping the bleeding. But let's talk through the match timeline, and then we'll dive into the statistical breakdown. At quarter time, Port Adelaide has slim lead, 5-3-33 to 5-1-31, and at halftime, they extended that lead to 8-6-54, leading 6-6-42. After that, Fremantle led at three-quarter time, 12-8-80 to 9-7-61, and the final scoreline saw Fremantle 15-13, 103, defeat Port Adelaide 11-9-75. In that second half, Port Adelaide went on to kick 3 goals 3. Fremantle went on to kick 9 goals, 7. What could have been if they had been a little bit more accurate as well. This is why I keep saying that without even seeing the fact that Fremantle have that 2, 3, 4 game lead on top of the ladder, they have been playing the most sustainable brand of football, because when their backs are against the wall and it seems that they're out, they just find a way to get back into it. And their run and carry game is so hard to stop when they execute it brilliantly. Their Achilles heel is still very much the same as Sydney, in the fact that if they overcommit to the handball and they turn the ball over too much, that is where their undoing happens, because they've all got that forward momentum, turn the ball over, and the opposition can capitalise and catch you off guard. The difference with Fremantle comparatively to Sydney, Fremantle do have a plan B, because they can resort back to their kicking and their maintaining the game in their hands, the momentum, by maintaining possession. And that's something that Sydney have failed to recognise outside of their handball game. It was, again, as I said, this team, they're something. I've been saying for years, Fremantle on paper have one of the best lists in the competition. You look at their forward line, their midfield, and their defense, they have star power in every single line. And when one goes down, they've got somebody of equal or greater talent to come in. They've got so many players at waffle level knocking on the door for opportunity is not funny. Jaeger O'Meara did do an ankle injury in this particular game. However, they went into this game with benching Shea Bolton just to give him a little bit of managed time off. You know, coming into finals, you want to make sure that you're fit and firing and good to go, so you can afford to rest some of your key players at the back end, and that's what they chose to do with Bolton, so he'll be a straight swap for Jaeger O'Meara anyway. Breaking down the team statistics, Fremantle's disposal, 379 led 341. They lost the kicking game, 220 to 194, but as I said, their handball game is where they get their ascendancy, and they had 64 more handballs, 185 against 121. They had 55 inside 50s against 47, so making more of the opportunity that they had with ball in hand. Inside 50, they ran at 56% efficiency, which was 10% better than Port Adelaide, who ran at 46%. The hit-out game and the stoppage work was an even keel, and I thought Port Adelaide did well again. No Butters, no Horne-Francis, and yet they still managed to draw even in this particular line. I think that is an incredible stat to walk away with and to hold in high regard moving forward. They won the hitouts 37 to 35, but they broke even on clearances, 36 apiece. They had double the amount of centre clearances, 18 to 9, but in the stoppage clearance, that's where they got beat up around the contest, with Fremantle having 9 more, 27 to 18. It was the uncontested possession of 40 the way of Fremantle, 242 to 212, which paved the way for Fremantle to get their ascendancy. And again, that 40 disposals leads to the fact that it was all those uncontested handballs that they had, their run and carry chains. It truly chopped up Port Adelaide, especially in the second half. And when you've got forwards that can read the ball as well as Fremantle have, and they're able to get out the back of packs, and they're able to put gap on their opponents, and they can see that transition game going, they're quicker to read the ball, they get ball in hand, and they were ending up in certain situations just running into open goal squares and kicking goals uncontested. Around the contest, Port Adelaide did take more marks. Again, obviously, Fremantle played a more predominant handball game. However, contested marking and marking inside 50, Fremantle absolutely took advantage of. They had 16 to 8 marks inside 50. 17 of those marks around the ground were contested. Port Adelaide only managed 4 contested marks for the game. Fremantle almost doubled their seasonal average in this particular outing. It was a different team in the second half. Fremantle, again, they find themselves in positions where they can perform so poorly, but just turn things around on the flip of a dime. 67 tackles the way of Fremantle, leading 58. Again, there are some retrospects that Port Adelaide should really walk away with heads held high in this particular outing. A lot of people expected Huge blowout here. I personally said I thought it was going to be staring down the barrel of a 10-plus goal win. So the fact that Port Adelaide can not only keep it tight on the scoreboard and not allow that blowout, not only lead for a half of football, but to statistically match Fremantle. Just moving forward, Port Adelaide should have a lot of confidence in their list. That's all I'm trying to get here. For the votes, don't know whether people will agree. Landed on 3 Fremantle players. Joe Richards probably the stiff one here because I thought he had a great game for Port Adelaide. I'm giving 1 vote though to Isaiah Dudley. Had a career high in disposals and almost everything he touched, at least half of what he touched, turned into a score. 18 disposals, 5 were contested, 3 marks, 4 tackles, 1 clearance, 294 metres gained, 1 goal, 3 goal assists, 10 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Jai Amos. 12 disposals, 7 contested, 4 marks, 246 metres gained, 4 goals, 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements. Now, everybody talks about Josh Tracy, and when I reveal my All-Australian team that I have selected, you will see Josh Tracy features in said team. But the fact that Jai Amos has kicked the same amount of goals as Josh Tracy and isn't getting spoken about in the same vein baffles me. And I question my own kind of legitimacy in retrospect as well, because I've disregarded Jai Amos for a very long time purely because of his accuracy on goal. But the fact that both of these guys have come out and they're staring down the barrel of both of them finishing the year on 50 plus goals each, to get a connection of 100 plus goals for this year is going to be huge for Fremantle and holds their forward line in such good stead as well, because Jai Amos is still rather young. He's still finding his feet in many and when you think about players hitting their peak when it comes to, you know, their age and their time in the game, key position players take longer to develop, and I feel Jai Amos is still yet to hit his peak as a key forward. But I thought he played well in this game. Best on ground, I'm giving to Caleb Sarong. I thought his work in and around the contest was huge. 28 disposals, 15 contested, 2 marks, 9 tackles, 8 clearances, 282 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. What did we learn? Port Adelaide, it is not all doom and gloom. There are pieces there. There is light at the end of the tunnel. It is just how you get there and the continuity in that journey. For Fremantle, what did we learn? Never count them out. Backs against the wall, down at half time, they find a way to get it done. And why? They have sustainably been the best team in the competition this year. I don't know whether this is a dynasty style team that we are looking at. Can they win 2 or 3 premierships in the next 5 years? Remains to be seen, because teams drop off each and every season. But it is hard to argue there is any better team in the competition than Fremantle right now, especially when it comes to the handball run and carry style game that a lot of teams like to try to play, but don't execute as nearly as good as these guys do. We then shift on down to Marvel Stadium, North Melbourne hosting Melbourne. I thought North Melbourne would have the advantage here given the fact that they're at Marvel. Had this game been at the MCG, I would have selected Melbourne to win this in a heartbeat. However, foolishly, going North Melbourne was my downfall, because it was Melbourne by the way of 16 points in a tight tussle, in a game that was a true back and forth, and there were many players that left everything on the line here, and it was again the tale of 2 halves. North Melbourne dominated the first half, and it was all Melbourne in the second half, especially in the final term. Game on the line, need to stand tall, and Melbourne just found ways to absolutely pick apart North Melbourne all around the ground. At quarter time, North Melbourne led 6-1-37 to 4-1-25. At halftime, they led 7-2-44 to 6-4-40. At 3/4 time, Melbourne hits the front 10-10-70 to 8-7-55, and the final scoreline saw Melbourne 13-14-92 defeat North Melbourne 11-10-76. As I said, when Melbourne needed to dig deep, they found a way, especially in the last. You got the typical performances from their top, more elite players, and I hate using terminology like that, but there's obviously, when you look at football teams, there's your more established, talented players, and then you've got the role players, and then you've got the young kids that kind of taper out down the bottom. And it was a true combination of all of that for Melbourne in this particular game. Unfortunately for Melbourne, they were struck with injury. They have a chest injury to Turner, Jyath does a leg injury, and I don't know where you kind of sit with them. Like, Disco Turner has definitely been one of their most improved players over the course of the year. Jyath comes in from Hawthorn. Don't truly know whether he's found his footing within Melbourne's defensive structure yet. But again, always terrible to see players go down with injury, regardless of the role they play. But the roles that were played by some of these Melbourne kids standing tall, I mean, they had a career best outing from Tom Sparrow. They had other players around the contest that really stood tall as well. And this was a game statistically that, again, was split by margins. North Melbourne win the disposal battle 396 to 373. They win the inside 50 battle 56 to 50. And yet it is their 48% efficiency inside 50 running up against the 62% efficiency that Melbourne ran at. Melbourne ran at 11% more effectiveness than what they usually do for other avenues throughout the season. They won the hit-out battle, Melbourne, 31 to 23. Marginally won the clearance battle, 36 to 34. So again, Max Gawn getting the better of Tristan Xerri and Cooper Trembath in the ruck contest, but the clearance battle was broken even. And I feel that is great from a North Melbourne standpoint, because we have seen Melbourne get on the end of some huge clearance gaps. And, you know, they love in and under contested clearance work. Jack Steele, Tom Sparrow, these types of players. So the fact that LDU, Harry Sheasel, these players are getting in and can match that, I think, again, similar to what Port Adelaide did against Fremantle, holds North Melbourne in great stead moving forward. It was very close in contested possession, 109 to 113, the way of Melbourne. Uncontested possession only went 14 the way of North Melbourne, 269 to 255. Marking around the ground, 107 to 103, the way of North Melbourne. Both had over 15 marks inside 50. Both had over 10 contested marks around the ground. And the defensive game was won by North Melbourne, 48 tackles to 39. So, statistically speaking, this is a game that North Melbourne should have, I feel at least anyway, ran out with, and quite comfortably as well. Around the contest, they applied more pressure. They had just as much ball around the contest, if not a little bit more. They had more looks inside 50, and they just failed to capitalize on those particular situations. And when you have a look at moving the ball inside 50, they go inside 50 6 more times. Paul Curtis has a great return with 3 goals. Charlie Spargo kicks 2. Darling kicks 2. But then you taper your way down, and this was a game, yet again, where we don't see much output from Nick Larkey. 10 disposals, only 2 behinds. And it's been a growing trend this year when talking about North Melbourne to the inconsistencies of Nick Larkey as a key forward. Now, obviously, being their number 1 key forward, he always attracts the number 1 defender. But there's been situations, and I try to say this without sounding so disparaging, but there's been plenty of times, and many key forwards do this, so I'm not at all accusing Nick Larkey of being an outlier here. But there's a lot of times where you see Nick Larkey calling for an easy ball over the top, and if he gets burnt, he cracks the shits big time. And it's okay to get your shits on if you don't get the ball given to you in certain situations. But as a captain, I think you should show a little bit more decorum and composure and poise when it comes to situations like that. Nick Larkey has the ability to come out and kick 6, and then he's got games like this where he comes out and doesn't kick a goal at all. I just feel a little bit of continuity has been lacking in his game this year, and maybe since he's been named captain, I'm not too sure. He's a great leader. Maybe he's not the one to captain this team moving forward. Maybe it goes to a Sheasel and you can have Nick Larkey as a vice captain. I don't know. It might upset some North Melbourne fans that conversation is to be had, but again, this is just all my personal take and personal opinion. I'm not backing up any of this by, wanting to be edgy or wanting to just get clicks or anything like that, because I'm getting fuck all clicks. So you can't sit there and say I'm trying to go against the grain to gain attention or anything like that. It's just all my personal opinion, and you can always feel free to disagree in the comment section down below. But yeah, it's just another out day for him when the games to be had, the games to be won, 16 points. I just feel there are some players that could have and should have had bigger games for North Melbourne, given the statistical breakdowns here. I did throw one vote to Harry Sheezel, though he was one of, if not North Melbourne's best on the day. 33 disposals, 9 were contested, 6 marks, 5 tackles, 2 clearances, 438 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 8 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Keziah Pickett. Many times during this game when he had ball in hand, the way he was moving around the contest just had, you know when you watch old school Looney Tunes cartoons and you see like the birds like doing circles above a character's head? I feel that's how dizzy he was leaving some of these midfielders with the rings he was running. 29 disposals, 9 were contested, 7 marks, 1 tackle, 4 clearances, 723 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements. Best on ground to me was Tom Sparrow. 33 disposals, career high for him, 17 of those were contested, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 10 clearances, 416 metres gained, 1 goal, 7 score involvements. And Tom Sparrow is a name that is being floated around as a potential trade target for many teams. With the season he has had this year, almost comes across like he's putting his best foot forward to get the attention of other teams. I don't know whether Melbourne will keep him. I think Melbourne would be crazy to let him go, personally. But as far as players that might be available on the trade table, every single team in the competition would be crazy to not have Tom Sparrow on their list as potential targets, because this kid, he's got a lot of talent about him, and he's been able to flourish with the likes of Petrarca and Oliver now gone, and he's been able to step up into that top echelon of Melbourne midfielders. What did we learn out of this game? For Melbourne, they still play this fun brand that can dismantle teams around the contest. They're very clean with ball in hand. They just have avenues to score through midfield, through forward line, and just their connection this year and the belief that Stephen King has been able to grow with this group, given the decisions they made. Not many coaches would have come into this club at the start of the year and gotten rid of Oliver, Petrarca, and Stephen May. Maybe Stephen May given his off-field crap, but those are some big names to drop, especially when you look at when Melbourne won their last premiership. Those 3 names were pivotal to winning that. So Stephen King has come in with a job to do, and he's getting that job done. For North Melbourne, I think, again, just continuity is their problem. And it's not continuity as a team. I feel it's just individual performances that lack continuity. Nick Larkey is one of those. You have some games where some of their defenders aren't up to par. But again, this is a very young list. They've got the key components there, and I feel out of all the rebuilding teams, this is one that can really get some work done. Do some things around the contest moving forward. They can move up the ladder very quickly, I feel. I mean, they're still in that wildcard contention this year, and I would love to see them get there as a neutral supporter. But again, there are just some times where some of the gears in the machine fail to fire, and unfortunately that means as a collective, the machine stops working. Does that make sense? I hope so. Let's move on. We move down the road to the MCG. Saturday night, a classic rivalry. Collingwood and Carlton going head-to-head in what can be described as a true tug-of-war. Collingwood have won their last after this game, given the fact that they won by 21 points, have won their last 5. And Carlton, coming off of a stretch of winning 6-7 in a row, have lost their last couple. Now, both of these teams are within that wildcard configuration. I feel Collingwood has the ability to finish higher. I think maybe a 5th or 6th placing could be where Collingwood land, which, given where they have been this year and some of the defeats that they have had, and people have written them off throughout the course of the season, that would be a huge return for them. For Carlton, obviously wildcard is still in contention, which in itself is a wild prospect given the start to the year they had. Both of these teams probably sitting thereabouts with where they're at and the game styles that we have seen. So coming into this game, we knew we were going to get an absolute classic. 21 points to Collingwood was the way of the victory, and as I said, can only be described as a true tug of war, a back and forth. Collingwood at quarter time led by 2 points, 3 goals straight 18, leading 2-4-16. At half time, they led by 8 points, 6-2-38, leading 4-6-30. At three-quarter time, they led by 14 points, 11-4-70, leading 8-8-56, and 21 points was the final score line, with 14-16-90, defeating 10-9-69. Statistically, sometimes a team might only have, 10, 12, 15 more contested possessions, things like that. And it doesn't seem like much to some on the outside. But in the heat of the moment and within the game, a gap like that could be more instrumental than we realise. Collingwood won the contested possessions by 13. They won the tackle count by 24 and pressure applied by 15. That combined with their halfback rebounding throughout this game, where they generated 46 points against 24, set them up for the win here. Just around the contest against a team that prides themselves on contested work and clearance, Collingwood's midfield did incredibly well, and that back six and the defensive press that they were able to put on was absolutely huge. They were within arm's reach, Carlton, many times, and they just let it slip out of their hands. The stoppage dominance was withered away early. I mean, at the stoppage, Carlton were doing some big things, and that just, as the game went on, that started to taper off. It become non-existent, and that's when Collingwood's midfield was able to put that gap on. So when you look at 13 contested possessions more the way of Collingwood after the start Carlton had statistically, again, a lot bigger than what the statistic lends itself to. They led first possessions by 10, but they only won the clearance count by 2. So they were getting their hands on the ball a lot more than Collingwood did, but Collingwood were finding a way to get those clearances, to get that stoppage work going in their favour. And they outscored Collingwood in clearance. So Collingwood might have had more contested possession. They were getting more clearance work. Collingwood struggled to score comparatively from that avenue, and Carlton's midfield were finding ascendancy in that fact, but it was just everywhere else around the ground just fell apart, and Collingwood were able to just get on top of everything. Yet it was the transitional game from intercept alone. They were outscored by 29 points. It's sometimes Carlton, and it's something that's been a growing trend with Carlton. It's what destroyed them at the first half of the season. Carlton can find ways to win plenty of the ball, but then they do nothing with it. And Collingwood, in some instances here, were secondary to the ball, but just absolutely made the best of their opportunities. It's a hard one to talk about sometimes. It truly is, as I try to reposition myself here on my chair. I apologise. Having a look to the injuries, I can't remember if there were any. Yes, there were. There was actually 2, and they're quite large too. So there was a very innocuous knee injury to Harry Mackay. It was knee-on-knee contact, and it looked very insignificant, but it ruled Harry Mackay out for the entire game. And Adam Cerra ended with a hamstring injury as well. I'm not sure to the severity of those injuries. Obviously, the hamstring a little bit more damning than the knee injury, I would think, but yeah, to lose Harry Mackay and the input up forward and Adam Cerra's contested work and outside run definitely impacted this game, I feel. Both those guys play the game out, and I think we might have gotten a different outcome. In the way of disposal, again, split by very minimal margins. Carlton led the disposal count 383 to 368. They had more kicks. They had only a couple less handballs. They had more inside 50s, 53 to 51, so they had plenty of looks inside 50. It was unfortunate, though, that without Harry Mackay, running at 45% efficiency was a little bit alarming. They did well in the clearance game. To get 41 clearances from 18 hitouts from your own, ruckman is huge. And what Carlton's midfield were doing is a growing trend as to what we have seen throughout the course of this year. Opposition ruckmen are getting dominant against certain teams, but the midfielders are quick to clue on to tap patterns and are roving to their opponents. 49 hitouts to 18 is the dominance that Collingwood had in that retrospect. Carlton win the clearance game 41 to 39. In the centre clearance, they won 16-11, and they lost the stoppage clearance 25-28. So Darcy Cameron was getting plenty of opportunity to tap it down throats, but Carlton were quick into the contest. Uncontested possession, Carlton had 33 more. Contested possessions, as I said, was led by 13, the way of Collingwood. Marks around the ground, 111 marks to Carlton to 87 for Collingwood. So Carlton were very much happy to try to maintain possession and keep it away from Collingwood. But just Collingwood, whenever they got the ball in hand, they were able to get a quicker press over the top, and it caught Carlton off guard more often than not. As far as the defensive game goes, this is where Collingwood dismantled them. And it was the tackle pressure from Collingwood around the contest that absolutely opened up Carlton, especially that midfield group. 72 tackles to 48. Collingwood only averaged 61 tackles a game this year, so they upped on their average, and Carlton were down on their average, averaging 56 tackles a game, only managed 48 in this particular outcome. So the disposal count, they were getting plenty of opportunities with ball in hand. Both teams, they had similar looks inside 50. It's just, again, pressure work and forcing turnover from Collingwood towards Carlton allowed quicker turnover, and it was the rebound work and the interceptability from that defensive half that was able to transition into big scores, which is what was the deciding factor in this particular game. When it came to the votes, I think it was pretty streamlined with the three I chose for this particular game. I gave one vote to Dan Houston, very up and down, and there are rumours that he might be on the out from Collingwood. He might be looking elsewhere. I don't know whether that's a decision he's making, whether that's something Collingwood perceive to be on the cards, or whether that's just a rumour going around. But I feel Dan Houston, again, I've said it numerous weeks, and I'll say it again, Dan Houston's best work at Port Adelaide was as that run and carry half back. Put him in that position at Collingwood. Let's get Josh Dacos out of the back line and put him into the midfield alongside his brother, and you watch not only Dan Houston become the all-Australian defender he once was, but watch that midfield group pop if you've got both Dacos boys running in there. I'm telling you now, it is a recipe for success. But Dan Houston had 25 disposals, 3 contested, 9 marks, 4 tackles, 1 clearance, 467 metres gained, 1 goal, and 7 score involvements. I gave 2 votes to Patrick Cripps. He is starting to find some form. 30 disposals, 12 contested, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 6 clearances, 440 metres gained, 2 goals, and 7 score involvements. Best on ground was Whisper Nick Dacos. 36 disposals, 6 were contested, 4 marks, 2 tackles, 4 clearances, 579 metres gained, 10 score involvements. It can be split. Was Patrick Cripps best on? Was Nick Dacos best on? I feel Nick Dacos with ball in hand was more influential on the score than what Cripps was. Sorry, Cripps did kick 2, and then had 7 score involvements, but 2 of those 7 were his own. Whereas Nick Dacos didn't hit the scoreboard, and yet still had 10 score involvements of his own. So I just feel from that kind of retrospect, Nick Dacos was just edgy. I don't know. It's so hard. And my reasoning, I could sit here and try to reason it all the time, and some people will agree, some people will disagree. Again, the conversation is open for discourse in the comments down below. What do we learn from this game? Collingwood, at their best, still find ways to win games, and we are often talking about their lack of forward presence and no genuine key forward, and yet we still have players like Membry and McStay stepping up and getting the job done. This proves you don't need champion players to be a champion team, and Collingwood personify that. For Carlton, I feel it was all but kind of like a waiting process in the time that they were going to start losing games again. They were never going to go on a generational rip where they weren't going to lose a game under Josh Fraser, and as much as they lost this game, there is still plenty to take out of it. Again, I feel the loss of Harry Mackay was damning on them from the get-go. They needed to rely on Kemp, on Cripps, who both had plenty of opportunities to score and absolutely butchered the ball. That's probably why I also push Patrick Cripps down a little bit on the votes as well. Plenty of opportunities to hit that scoreboard more often and stand up as a leader, but failed to do so. But they are still going to be thereabouts, as much as I hate to admit it, because I've got a bit of a deep-seated kind of disdain towards Carlton, especially their supporter base. Not all of them. I know every team has bad supporters, but I've just had some very poor experiences in the past before, which has kind of painted them in a foul light, which is unfortunate, obviously. But both of these teams moving forward have a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, and whoever takes over as coach for Carlton has a great list to work with, I feel. Collingwood obviously just getting the job done against all odds and people's expectations. I don't want to dwell on it anymore. Let's go on to the next game. The tale of two halves seems to be a very much defining kind of descriptive of this particular round, because West Coast against Brisbane up at Optus Stadium definitely fell into that bracket. West Coast dominated the game in the first half. Brisbane ran away with it, securing a 24-point win in the second half. And again, similar to the circumstances with Port Adelaide taking on Fremantle, there is a lot to take away from this game if you are a West Coast fan. And as, you know, teams that are going through rebuilding phases and they're missing, like, you know, some teams like Port Adelaide, for example, missing their key movers, or West Coast purely becoming more reliant on these young kids stepping up into opportunities, it's always integral, especially as supporters of these teams, to look at any kind of bright light that you can cling on to. You don't want to fall into despair just thinking that your team's terrible. I'm a Richmond supporter. Out of this round, we end up finishing last on the ladder. So if you want to talk to anybody about teams underperforming and looking for bright lights, I'm kind of poster boy right now as far as I'm concerned. You always kind of look at either there are statistical advantages you can take out of, individual performances you can highlight, and there was definitely plenty of those for West Coast in this game. Many would have expected Brisbane to actually absolutely mollywop the shit out of them, but West Coast took it to the reigning premiers, and you've got to give respect where it is earned. At quarter time, West Coast led 5-2-32 to 2-5-17. At halftime, they led marginally 6-4-40 to 4-9-33. Three-quarter time, it was an arm wrestle, but Brisbane hit the front 10-11-71, leading 8-7-55, and the final score line saw Brisbane 13-15-93 defeat West Coast 10-9-69. Now, this could have been a bigger blowout if Brisbane were accurate, and this has been a tale of the tape for Brisbane for a very long time. Their inaccuracy in front of goal opens up opportunities for them to be dismantled by teams that don't allow that door to be closed on them. They don't just keep the door ajar, they kick that bastard wide open. West Coast, unfortunately, in a position where they don't have those kind of key positional like gears in place to be able to deliver that kind of thing. But the fact that they were still up to it at halftime, that they've come out of the gates and absolutely taken it to Brisbane, they've caught them off guard. Just the endeavour, even when Brisbane hit the front in the second half and ran away with the game, West Coast never stopped. The endeavour was there from start to finish, and as I said, respect was earned, in my opinion, by West Coast in this game, and you've got to give credit where credit is due. Again, though, Brisbane's defensive work and the rebounding work and scores from intercepts and things of that nature just absolutely opened up West Coast in that second half. I mean, Harris Andrews has 7 intercept marks in this particular game and recorded a game-high 10 intercept possessions and 10 contested possessions as a key defender, as a fullback. Just goes to show that West Coast were getting plenty of looks forward half of the ball, but Harris Andrews was cutting them off at the pass. They had plenty of opportunity, but they weren't nailing their inside 50 movements. And a team like Brisbane is going to eat that up every day of the week. The clearance game was won by the Eagles 42-38. And when you think of the midfield of Brisbane, when you think of Ashcroft, you think of Neil, you've got McCluggage in there, you've got Rayner pinch hitting, you've got Dunkley. The list just keeps on going with this midfield. But what a lot of people fail to recognise with West Coast is they are one of the better clearance teams in the competition. And to be down the bottom end of the ladder, but statistically have that advantage, shows again that moving forward, once all these kids get game time and start building their bodies up to the rigors of this game, they are going to be a team to be reckoned with. Especially once Tasmania come in and start eating up all the draft picks. This is where teams like West Coast are going to thrive. From the clearance game that they won, they scored 5 goals 8 from stoppage, leading Brisbane's 4 goals 7, including from centre clearance. They scored 3 goals 3 to only 3 behinds. So in this midfield, West Coast had superior dominance. But despite that, even though the Lions were beaten in clearance and inside 50s in the second half, they still managed to score 4 goals 3 from stoppage. And from those entries that they had inside 50 in the second half, they scored 48% of the time. West Coast won the inside 50 count for the second half, but only scored 24% of the time from those inside 50 looks. So again, that's where players like Harris Andrews were pivotal in this game. Absolutely chopped it up. They scored 48 more marks than the Eagles, including 15-3 contested, which is their second best differential in a match this season. So Brisbane, again, just getting back to their best at the right time. And if anybody at the start of the year were questioning whether or not a three-peat was on the cards, this very much is a reality that we are now looking at with Brisbane. They are back in some hot form. They should finish top 4, and it's just a run from there. I can't see, at their best, even with Fremantle being the benchmark this year, Brisbane are just so hard to back against. They've just built their team so incredibly well. Breaking down the team statistics, disposal count, Brisbane did get the better of, 394 to 322. They had 40-odd more kicks. They had, 30-odd more handballs. Inside 50s, they ended up winning by 9. They only had 9 more inside 50s for the game, but again, going inside 50, from those 49 inside 50s that West Coast had, they only ran at 40% efficiency. Brisbane had 58. They ran at 53% efficiency. So kind of equaled out a little bit. As far as the stoppage game goes, again, West Coast won the stoppage game. 48 hitouts to 38, 42 clearances to 38. And as far as work around the contest goes, when it came to the crunching the numbers and how Brisbane's ball work kind of undid West Coast in that second half, the uncontested possession is where Brisbane put on their gap. And that's where inexperience, I suppose, from a young West Coast team crept into the game, because Brisbane were just smart in how they were able to freely transition the ball and just keep momentum on their side. 241 uncontested possessions to 179. So they clear this team by pretty much 60, 70 odd uncontested possessions. And if you do that to any team, you're going to get field dominance and all the momentum is on your side. You've pretty much got the control of the momentum of the entire game in your hands. And Brisbane are just a smart team. They know how to use that. And when they've got all those uncontested possessions, they take 115 marks ahead of 67 for the game. 12 marks inside 50, 15 contested, when West Coast can only manage 3 contested marks for the game. Just opened it up. Defensively, though, speaking of pressure, West Coast were up to it. 69 tackles to 56. So both teams running well above their seasonal averages for tackles. So this was a team, again, where even though Brisbane had a lot of uncontested possession defensively to the forward line, that's where most things happened. They were getting all those intercept marks. They were getting all that rebound work. They were able to chip it around, find open gaps, and freely get the ball forward. But whenever the ball was to be won in a contested setting, West Coast were up to the task. Stoppage game, they won. Tackle game, they won. These are moments that West Coast need to cling on to moving forward, because it shows them that they're doing the right thing. There is just systematic breakdowns in certain other areas that will get better with time. It's nothing to do with the personnel they have. They have the personnel. They just need time to develop. That's all it is with West Coast. And once these players get to where they need to be, as I said, they are going to be a powerhouse once more. I can see it. They are going to be absolutely obliterating teams. Optus Stadium's going to become a fortress. They're going to be one to watch. Mark my words. As far as individual efforts go, when it came to the votes of this game, I feel like I've done Harris Andrews a little dirty, because Harris Andrews was huge in this game, and yet I haven't given him a vote. And he was so critical to the game, but the 3 I landed on, I just thought as far as the game went, especially in stoppage work when West Coast had the ascendancy. These players just stood up when they needed to. I gave 1 vote to Lachie Neale. 32 disposals, 17 contested, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 6 clearances, 286 metres gained, 1 goal, 8 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Kai Lohmann. He's another player that's apparently being floated around as a potential trade target, and he's a little bit hit and miss. Some weeks he might go missing. This week he definitely rocked up to play. 18 disposals, 5 were contested, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 372 metres gained, 4 goals, 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements, and best on ground to me, I thought anyway, was Josh Dunkley. And I just thought his pressure work around the contest was pivotal to turning the game around when it needed to be won. 28 disposals, 11 contested, 10 marks, 7 tackles, 4 clearances, 403 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 9 score involvements. What did we learn? I think I've already established it. Brisbane's three-peat is still very much on the cards because their best is still amongst, if not, the best in the comp. West Coast, they lose this game, but they win a lot by statistics, and you take those and you learn and you grow. And as I've said numerous times already, as the years progressed with the list that they have got, they are going to become a serious contender. I actually think within the next 2 to 3 years, West Coast are going to be competing for wildcard position. Heard it here first. I've said a few times over the last few round recaps that unfortunately there's going to be some rounds where we get games where we just quickly breeze over it because it was just a blowout and there's not much to really talk about for either side because one side was just too dominant. And unfortunately, my boys were at the receiving end of an absolute belting in a game where we lose disposal count, we lose tackle count, forwards are getting benched because they're winning by so much, and then their defenders are scoring goals. This was as insipid a performance that I have seen from Richmond in a very long time. Inaccuracy hurt us. We kicked 6 goals, 16. We had 22 looks at goal, and we kicked 6 goals. It just breaks my heart. You try to look for the light, as I've just said with West Coast, and it is so hard with performances like this with Richmond. And of course, now the discourse is Uze's not the man and things of this nature. Doesn't help that when we get an outcome like this, and our CEO comes out saying that Uze is doing an outstanding job. We've got a huge injury list, don't get me wrong, and Uze's working with what he's got. But given how we've performed this year, the word outstanding being floated around probably isn't the right choice at all. At all. It was Hawthorn by 70 points, which I think should have been a lot more and is rather flattering to Richmond given how things went down. The match timeline here. Quarter time, Hawthorn led 5-4-34 to 5 behinds. At halftime, 12-9-81 led 2-6-18. 3-quarter time, 16-11, 107, led 3-11, 29. Full time, 18-14, 122, defeated Richmond 6-16, 52. You know what hurts the most? This is a game again where Richmond win clearance. Richmond historically have been a terrible clearance team, especially throughout our Premiership years. Hawthorn have prided themselves this year on clearance. And we win this clearance battle 35-29. And yet, we were unable to hit the scoreboard from this course. We kicked 1 goal 6 from clearance. In comparison, Hawthorn lost the clearance game and kicked 42 points. 6 goals 6 from this source. From centre clearance, they kicked 3 goals straight. And as I said, Hawthorn controlled possession. They had plus 101 in uncontested possession, which is their largest differentiation for the season. 102 disposals more, 39 more uncontested marks, and 62 more handball receives. And I still think with all those outrageous numbers they had, Richmond lost the tackle count as well. I don't know how you can have 100 more clearances, 100 more possessions, rather, 100 more clearances, holy shit. 100 more disposals for a game, and somehow, some way, you lose the tackle count. I don't understand. It was an unfortunate outing given the fact that Taj Houghton ended with a ankle injury and Steely Green ended with concussion. Jack Ginnivan ended on the bench with back soreness, probably because he's been carrying that fucking inside 50 score involvement work that he's been doing for God knows how long. I mean, you get so many score involvements and you can afford to be rested, I suppose. Again, just listen to these counts. And I mean, the counts that, again, it's just, I'm so just flabbergasted that even with the dominance Hawthorn had, there are some stat lines here that Richmond won or got close to. So we got a little bit of quality return, but it's still just the blowout and the uninspired kind of performance just puts a dampener on it, so much so. 431 disposals to 329, the way of Hawthorn. 230 kicks to 187. 201 handballs to 142. Yet they only had 9 more inside 50s. 60 inside 50s to 51. But when you look at the efficiency inside 50, Richmond ran at 51%. Hawthorn lead at 60. Now, you can talk free kick counts all you want, because Hawthorn had 23 free kicks to 11. But I mean, and you make the argument, oh, you're first to the ball, you get a free kick. But they were first to the ball all game. And yeah, they're pretty much argument said, I suppose. But yeah, we won't get involved with that. Hitouts, 26 to 31. We stem even. Clearances, 35 to 29. We win. And we win the stoppage clearance. You know, uncontested possession, though, they had 101 more. We only lost the contested count by 2. 69 marks to 107 is pretty damning, especially considering contested marks were pretty even, and inside 50 marks, they only had 2 more marks inside 50 than we did. So again, we were matching in certain aspects, but again, they have 101 more disposals, but they lay 18 more tackles for the game. We lay 50 tackles, they lay 68. And they've laid 18 more tackles in a game where they've had majority of the ball. I don't know, there's just... You look at the clearance work and you're like, that's something to look at as a positive. You look at the inside 50s, we only lose it by 9, considering they had 100 more disposals. You look at that as a positive. But then you've got all those inside 50s and you've kicked 16 behinds and you've only managed 6 goals for a game. It's not something that you need, that, you know, it then just takes sting out of the positive and it makes it harder to look at. It hurts. It hurts sometimes. Personally, I think it's a little bit harsh to be saying that Uze isn't the man, but then I look at some things in isolation and we've taken such a backward step that I don't think Uze is the man. I had personal preferences for who I wanted as coach when the position opened. I personally wanted Chris Newman named as our senior coach, and when we've got John Longmire still out there, when we've got Adam Simpson still out there, now that Ken Hinckley's been named as Tasmania coach, I think Richmond would be stupid to not try to get one of those guys on board. I think Longmire and Simpson would both do great things with our young list. And any coach would be stupid to pass up the opportunity, because such a young list, you can develop that in your own style. I think, as harsh as it is, I don't think Uze's the man. We're going to move on. I don't want to dwell on it too much. 3-2-1, obviously all the way of Hawthorn. I've given 1 vote to Nick Watson, 11 disposals, 3 contested, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 330 metres gained, 5 goals and 7 score involvements. 2 vote I gave to Connor McDonald, 33 disposals, 3 contested, 10 marks, 2 tackles, 371 metres gained, 4 goal assists, 9 score involvements, and best on Jarman Impey, halfback, towed us up all game. 34 disposals, 4 contested, 11 marks, 1 tackle, 680 metres gained, 1 goal, 7 score involvements. What did we learn? I suppose there is some light to cling on to Richmond, but the light is starting to dim a little bit, especially with outings like and outcomes like this. And with Hawthorn, their best is scary. It's scary good. But that also brings about a potential thing to bring up, talking about fixturing. Hawthorn getting a run against Richmond this late in the piece and getting a huge percentage boost is going to help them a long way to getting a top 4 finish. I personally think, now feel free to disagree, if we're going to have mid-season buys, have the fixturing go up until the end of those buys, and then after those buys or during those buys, reconfigure the fixture for the rest of the season based upon where teams are currently sitting. Because you look at Geelong. Geelong's last 4 games sees them play North Melbourne, West Coast and Richmond, I'm pretty sure, in those last 4. So you've got teams at the top end that are getting concessions to play against these bottom teams that they're surely going to absolutely belt and get a huge percentage for. Whereas at the back end of the year, I would personally like to see these top contending teams fight each other for positioning, and the bottom teams fighting it out to see where they can finish. That way, I feel it just balances out the competition a little bit more equalization. I don't know. Feel free to talk about it down below, but boy, Hawthorn were good, and this was a game that I feel for most of it, I was just watching through my hands like this, just hoping that the beatdown would stop. You know the Simpsons episode where the beatdown's going on and the kid's crying and he's like, stop, he's already dead? That's fucking what happened here. We can leave that rabble behind and we move up north to People's First Stadium with Gold Coast hosting the Bulldogs. The fall from grace by the Gold Coast needs to be studied. This is a team that started the year undefeated, that only a few months ago was well in touch within the top 8, the top 6. I keep forgetting that there's a wildcard configuration now, so it's now top 6 and then wildcard. Whatever the fact, they were there. They have now lost their last 8 games in a row, and it doesn't help any situation when Damien Hardwick comes out a couple of weeks ago, 6 rounds left at this point in time, and turns around and says that basically they don't care about the rest of the year, that they've failed and they're basically writing it off. And that is not the mindset a senior coach should have, especially when there is possibility to finish wildcard, finals still in touch, and you're basically throwing in the towel. I mean, from a Richmond perspective, for what Damien Hardwick did to us on the way out, I couldn't be fucking happier, right? I really couldn't. I'm in the box seat of believing that Damien Hardwick handed Adam Uze a poisoned chalice, and that's half of the reason why we're struggling as bad as we are. But it was the Bulldogs by 9. Even though this loss streak for the Gold Coast has continued, they were actually competitive in this game, and they led for portions of this game. At quarter time, the Bulldogs led 2-2-14 to 1-2-8. At half time, the Gold Coast led 6-6-42 to 5-6-36. At three-quarter time, the Bulldogs led 10-9-69 to 6-10-46, and the final scoreline saw the Bulldogs only kicking 1 goal too, finishing 11-11-77, but doing enough damage in that third term to defeat the Gold Coast 9-14-68. Shooting themselves in the foot. Don't get me wrong, the efficiency of the Bulldogs gets them over the line here, because obviously they kick as much goals as they do behinds, comparatively to when you look at the Gold Coast kicking 9-14. Despite having 91 less disposals for this game, 9 fewer clearances and 11 less inside 50s, they get over the line by virtue of their forward half game, which outscored the Suns by margins. 9 goals 660 to 5-7-37 from forward half chains. Getting the ball forward half and just being able to execute from forward half motion, the Bulldogs were far superior. And that is what ended up being the difference maker in this particular game. Having a look at said team statistics, however, the Gold Coast should have cleared this game substantially. They had close enough to 100 more disposals in this game. 401 leading 309. They had 1 more kick than the Bulldogs, but they had 91 more handballs. They tried getting the run and carry game going and it just failed. They had 10 more inside 50s. 54, leading 43. Clearance work. The ruck battle. 45-28, the way of the Gold Coast. Clearances, 39-31, the way of the Gold Coast. Uncontested possession, they had almost 80 more uncontested. And still just couldn't find ways to get things done. They took 9 more marks, 100-91. They took 15 marks inside 50 against 10. They laid 20 more tackles for the game and still could not get the job done. This is where the conversation of quality versus quantity always comes into factor. This is where I would have loved to have seen Richmond be a little bit more competitive on the scoreboard with Hawthorn, because Hawthorn was 100 disposals clear, very similar in this circumstance, but yet the Bulldogs found ascendancy with ball in hand, with the quality of the ball that they managed to have. That's where you divide and draw the line in the sand between the good teams and the struggling teams. The Dogs, by all rights here, should have lost this game by 3 or 4 goals. Quite comfortably. But the Gold Coast have been their own worst enemy. And again, it's just wild to think that the Gold Coast have performed better this year without Matt Rowell in the team. Matt Rowell missing the early parts of the year with that injured hand that he had, and the Gold Coast were flying. He comes into the team, and it's thrown the entire team out of whack. And I don't know whether getting Christian Petrarca was the answer. He's been great up there, don't get me wrong. He's in a bit of a form slump himself. And I keep saying, week after week, the quartet of Miller, Petrarca, Anderson, Rowell, comfortably and easily one of the best quartets in the competition, but they have failed to fire with all 4 of them in the same team at the same time. And the Gold Coast problems are only going to compound more with Ben King now expected to sign with Hawthorn on a long-term deal, with potentially Bailey Humphrey leaving to come back to Victoria. It's going to get uglier for the Gold Coast. Don't get me wrong, again, with Hardwick and how he exited and left Richmond in the state that he's left it in, I couldn't be happier for him to fall flat on his face. A lot of people thinking he's coming up with excuses. Don't forget the fact that he was using the same excuses he's using at the Gold Coast that he did when he was at Richmond. Always pointing the blame at someone else instead of looking internally, always passing the buck, and to think that with 6 weeks to go, you would officially announce that your campaign is ended, I don't know how that can't be perceived as anything but tanking. That's just my personal opinion. We'll get into the votes for this game. I did land, despite the Bulldogs winning, on 2 Gold Coast players for votes. Matt Rowell gets the 1 vote for me. 26 disposals, 12 contested, 4 marks, 11 tackles, 7 clearances, 200 metres gained, 6 score involvements. Again, as an individual, absolutely shone. The 2 votes goes to Touk Miller, one of the highest rated players on the field. 39 disposals, 17 contested, 5 marks, 5 tackles, 9 clearances, 332 metres gained, 1 goal, 6 score involvements. Now let's compare that to the other 2 that we were just talking about to see whether or not they fired on all cylinders. We go down to Noah Anderson. 23 disposals, 4 tackles, 4 clearances. Okay, reputable. Petrarca, 23 disposals, only lays 1 tackle, only has 3 clearances, but he kicks 2 goals. Reputable, but doesn't get near the level that the other 2 were firing at. And that's where discrepancy falls into place. If all 4 of those guys fire at once, Gold Coast would be a powerhouse. Their midfield would be near unstoppable. Best on ground for me, though, was Sir Marcus Bontempelli. 23 disposals, 14 contested, 2 marks, 5 tackles, 5 clearances, 565 metres gained, 3 goals, 9 score involvements. You can make an argument for Touk Miller being best on, but they win this game by a kick. Bontempelli kicks 3, has 9 score involvements, and has a handful of tackles and clearances on his own. I think those goals marginally just puts him ahead of Touk Miller. What did we learn about this particular game? Gold Coast have the personnel, but they're the opposite to what we have seen from other teams. We said about Collingwood earlier in this video. They don't have a whole lot of star players, but they can still be a star team. They have role players that make this club great. The Gold Coast have gone on a spree of bringing in all these players under the belief that bringing in star power is going to make them a star team, and unfortunately that has been their undoing. For the Bulldogs, they are still a great club to watch. Their efficiency needs to be cleaned up in some retrospects, but as far as finals contention go, the Bulldogs are always in the conversation, and I feel with this wildcard round, if any club falls within that wildcard round and could do damage within that top 6, I feel the Bulldogs on their given day can upset anybody. It's just, unfortunately this year, injury has forced certain positions and changes and outcomes. We know they're starting to get these personnel back, but Marcus Bontempelli, he is still being pulled from pillar to post. He's going to need a lot of work done on the off season to get his body right again. But boy, the devotion this man has for this club, just to carry them on his back, regardless of the state that his own body is in, none better. Absolutely incredible leader, and the Bulldogs with a very gutsy win. Very hard to win at People's First, and they made it in part look rather easy. The final game of the round blows my fucking mind. I was listening to this on the radio, and I, as many others would have expected, thought GWS were going to win this in a landslide, but the Bombers win by 3 points. Get off the bottom of the ladder. Drop Richmond to dead last in a game where Jake Stringer kicks like 7 or 8 behinds, and Essendon make GWS look second rate. Toby Green goes down with a quad injury in this game and came into the game underdone. He has said by his own omission that he came into this game with a bit of a complaint, and as soon as the injury happened, he knew he was done. Probably shouldn't have played. Could have brought somebody else in that is healthy, and they could have been not just one man down on the bench, but that's what leaders do. They kind of sacrifice themselves a little bit in that retrospect to try to get their team over the line, but better leaders identify that they need to step away a little bit, and I think Toby Green should have done that. Match timeline, quarter time, Essendon led 2-4-16 to 2-3-15. Half time, they led 3-6-24 to 2-9-21. At three-quarter time, 7-6-48 led 5-12-42. Final scoreline, 10-7-67, defeats 8-16-64. The Giants missed a huge opportunity to get a much-needed win to stay in touch with wildcard contention here. Their errant kicking at goal proving the most critical, obviously. The leverage that Essendon got in the clearance battle, 45-28. Huge for a young Essendon team. To kick the first 4 goals from stoppage and finish with a season-high pressure rating of 189. This is a performance that had the commentary team questioning where this endeavour has been all year. They've been blown out of the water some games, have been competitive in others, but we haven't seen a consistent pressure rating from this team like we did in this particular game. It was absolutely monumental, this win. It brings about belief, it brings about some faith and some respect. And while I touched on the fact that Green did a quad, Dersman went down with a hamstring. I'm not sure on the severity, but the biggest concern out of this game was Nate Caddy ends up leaving and having to go to hospital with an elevated heart rate. Again, I don't know what's happened with the fallout from that, but to come to the bench feeling unwell and then collapsing on the sideline in front of your coach, Dean Solomon couldn't get over there quick enough to try to help him back on his feet. That's just something that we very rarely see in the game, is something like that happen, and it was scary to hear on the radio, let alone watch back and witness happen in real time. Statistically breaking this game down, again, even keel around the contest. 368 disposals for the Giants, leading 367 for Essendon. The kicking game was won by Essendon by 13. The handball game was won by GWS by 14. 49 inside 50s for Essendon against 46. The difference maker being GWS ran at a higher efficiency inside 50. 56% over 42. And yet, you'd think 16 behinds would have that efficiency well down. This was a highly adjudicated free kick game. There were 42 free kicks paid. 27 of those went to Essendon. And I feel there were some late in the game that might have swayed decision just a little bit, but I don't want to take away from the spirited effort from Essendon, because they led at every point, and the pressure they brought to this game makes them deserving winners. But I just feel with a game like this that is on the line and so close, umpires picking and choosing when to blow the whistle is such a fucking killer. Anyway, we move on, because this is where the dominance starts to creep in. They break away from breaking even with disposal count, but the stoppage game is where Essendon dominated. 41-37 hitouts the way of Essendon. 45 clearances to 28 the way of the Bombers, with 35 stoppage clearances leading 19. They were confidently the better midfield on the day. 72 marks to 85 the way of the Giants. Around the ground, tackles were pretty even. 71-78 the way of the Giants. But to think that GWS have players like Finn Callaghan, like Clayton Oliver, these players that have been popping off each and every week, and they didn't get close to being best on for the Giants. Lockie Ash and Lockie Whitfield were the two better performing Giants on the day. Finn Callaghan still had a 27 disposal game, 5 tackles, but didn't have a clearance for the game. We go down to Clayton Oliver. He had 8 clearances, but only 23 disposals. He laid 6 tackles as well. So by his own count, The effort that he did without ball was great, but he just didn't get enough of the ball to have impact. Then comparatively, you have a look at all the best ons, and there were some names that I'm giving votes to in this game that wouldn't have been usually synonymous, I feel, with best on if we're talking about Essendon. I want to give honourable mentions to Archie Roberts in defence. I thought he was great. I thought Sam Durham in the contest was great, 20 odd disposals and 7 clearances. But this is where I landed. I'm giving Nick Bryan 1 vote. 17 disposals, 11 contested, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 31 hitouts, 8 clearances, 307 metres gained, 2 goals and 3 score involvements. 2 votes I'm giving to Zach Merritt, one of his best for the year. 35 disposals, 8 contested, 2 marks, 5 tackles, 3 clearances, 452 metres gained, 1 goal and 6 score involvements. And best on ground, even though the output is less than Merritt, I feel what he did without ball in hand, and even with ball, more quality came from it and more opportunities were created from it as well. Dyson Sharp, 23 disposals, 12 contested, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 7 clearances, 214 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 score involvements. This was a game where it wasn't just Essendon's better players putting on performances. This was a game where some players that haven't gotten recognition before stood tall, announced themselves. This is a young Essendon team that came to fight and have put their name on the board. We now know they have this within them. It is just now up to them to find this within them each and every week. What did we learn from this game? Essendon, as I just said, they are capable of things. It is just the inability to find this on a weekly basis. Some people still maintain, despite this win, not taking things away from them, that they are the hardest team to watch live because of how uncompetitive they have been in some games this year. Which I think is fair. But, again, you hold onto the light that you can find, and not only do they win, but statistically, they have beaten GWS in some areas that GWS should have absolutely slaughtered them in. So you take a lot out of this game, not just the respect from neutral supporters and the love from your own, but going forward, you build self-belief. For GWS, they have fumbled a must-win game. I think losing this is going to force them out of wildcard contention. I don't think they make it now, especially with the loss of Toby Green with a quad injury, which could have been avoided. I don't know how this is going to set them off moving forward, but boy, they fumbled one that could have seen them play finals this year, and if this is the difference maker, they are going to they're going to lose their minds. With each and every game of round 19 dissected and spoken about, we can now turn attention to the AFL ladder to see where your team is situated after 19 rounds. On top of the ladder, 3 games clear on 64 points, we have Fremantle. In second place on 52 points, we have Sydney, who sit only 2 points, half a game clear of next best, which is Hawthorn in third place. Trailing that by 2 points, half a win behind, we have Brisbane in 4th, Adelaide in 5th, and Melbourne in 6th. 1 win behind them in 7th place, we have the Bulldogs. Half a win behind them in 8th place, we have Collingwood. Half a game behind them, we have Geelong in 9th, and then 2 wins behind them. Is that a win and a half? No, that is 2 wins. We have St Kilda on 32 points, rounding out the wild card round, but GWS, Carlton and North Melbourne, 11th, 12th and 13th respectively, all on 32 points apiece as well. This is where percentage breaks things down. GWS are out of wildcard right now by less than 3%. We have the likes of Brisbane, Adelaide. Well, Adelaide and Brisbane are separated by 0.6%. Then there is a big gap between Adelaide and next best. But some of these teams, as I said, percentage is going to play a big factor. In 14th place on 28 points, we have the Gold Coast Suns. In 15th place on 24 points, we have Port Adelaide. In 16th place on 16 points, we have West Coast. And then in 17th and 18th respectively, tied on 8 points, we have Essendon moving out of last place and Richmond dropping down to last place. And with all the formalities out of the way, the final 2 things for us to do is to reveal the leaderboard for the Hip and Shoulders MVP Award, which is where all the votes get tallied up to, and then reveal my team of the week for round 19. Starting, of course, with that leaderboard for the MVP Award, and we now have some definitive placings. Some votes this week have shifted the top 10 substantially. In 10th place on 15 votes, I have Max Holmes, Tristan Cherry, and Patrick Cripps. In 9th place on 16 votes, I have Jai Newcomb, Jason Horne-Francis, and Lockie Neal. In 8th place on 17 votes, I have Max Gawn and Will Ashcroft. In 7th place on 18 votes, I have Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. In 6th place on 20 votes, I have Luke Jackson and Jordan Dawson. And now the top 5 are all singular placings. In 5th place on 22 votes, I have Zach Butters. In 4th place on 25 votes, I have Marcus Bontempelli. In 3rd place on 26 votes, I have Bailey Smith. In 2nd place on 29 votes, I have Harry Sheasel. And taking the lead on his own, 31 votes in 1st place, I have Nick Dacos. Team of the week, round 19, the last thing to reveal, and this is how it shapes up. In defence, I have Jake Bowie and Lawson Humphreys in the back pockets and Harris Andrews at full back, with Wayne Malira and Jarman Impey on the half-back flanks and Dan Houston at centre-half back. In the midfield, I have Connor McDonald and Dyson Sharp on the wings and Josh Dunkley in the centre, with Rowan Marshall in the ruck, Nick Dacos at ruck rover, and Marcus Bontempelli at rover. Up forward, I have Kai Lohman and Keziah Pickett on the half-forward flanks and Jai Amos at centre-half forward, with Tom Papley and Nick Watson in the forward pockets and Mitch Lewis at full forward. On the interchange, I have Brian Myers, Patrick Cripps, Touk Miller, Bailey Smith, and Zach Merritt. This week's coach of the round is Dean Solomon, and this week's assistant coach of the round is Matthew Nix. And with that, the round is officially recapped. I do thank you for joining me once more. If you enjoyed what I did and appreciate the time and effort that goes into these videos, I would appreciate it a lot if you hit that like button down below. And if you want to get on board the community we are building, hit that subscribe button while you're down there as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. And as always, I will catch you guys next time.